right now. Got my good friend Simon Fox. How are you?
I'm doing good, doing really good. Emerging from spending the last few months editing at a computer, so getting reacquainted with daytime, and I would say sunshine, but not quite.
Right. And now you sent over title of videographer, but I mean, you do a little bit more than that, right?
Well, I am much more used to being on that side of the camera, but I do videography and editing, as well as some still photography. And I don't know, tag along with you sometimes.
All right, good stuff. Like I said on the top of the show, met Simon during the Seattle protests, and although Converge, we were pretty good at making internal video, we didn't have anything external to be able to talk to the general public about what Converge is about, because we were busy talking about what the news. And Simon came on the scene and used all your videography and editing experience and really made actually made our first video talking about like, where's Converge, is what we do, here's how people can support. I'll never forget that, man.
Me neither. It was a great experience for me too. It was awesome to get to work with all of you, and I don't know, looking forward to maybe future collaboration.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right. So amongst the many things that you do and you got going on, you're part of a group or organization called Roosevelt Alumni for Racial Equity. Why don't you tell us what that's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. RARE, Roosevelt Alumni for Racial Equity, came together in the summer of 2020. And they kind of looked at the state of things. They had classmates that were part of the voluntary racial transfer program, which was kind of Seattle's first attempt at integrating through busing. So students from the CD and the Central District were bused up to Roosevelt at kind of an attempt at integration. And so in the summer of 2020, classmates came back together that they were thinking about celebrating their 50th high school reunion, but decided to come together in maybe a more meaningful and impactful way, and put together a scholarship foundation for students of color at Roosevelt, as well as production on a documentary that would kind of illuminate the history of busing and attempts at integration in Seattle over the last 50 years, starting with the voluntary racial transfer program, going through mandatory busing, and then controlled choice, to the landscape that we find ourselves in today, which is very little, if any, busing, very little, if any, attempts at integrating our schools. And so we, through the process of working on the documentary, found Seattle Public Schools are kind of resegregated after all this time.
It's interesting because now that Black people have been gentrified out of the city, it's gone back to neighborhood schools. But when people wanted to go to school in the neighborhood, like G. Prez lived by Garfield, he was out in Ingram. You know what I'm saying? So that's real. This sounds like this documentary it talks and covers a lot of this, huh?
Yeah. So I know you're talking Roosevelt. You're saying, hey, I was a Bulldog. I don't know if I want to give too much airtime to these Rough Riders. But I would say that the documentary itself is about much more than just Roosevelt. It kind of uses Roosevelt as a case study, as a fairly wealthy North End school, but that's in the context of Seattle Public Schools, where we have a ton of inequity between North and South End.
No, and let me tell you, first of all, I got nothing but good memories hanging out over at Roosevelt. So you guys, it's all, and these days, to be honest with you, the city has changed so much. So anybody that like went to a Seattle public high school, like come on the show. It's all good. It's no issue. We got a trailer that you put together here, man. I'll let you set it up. Tell us what we're going to see here.
Well, this is a trailer of the full documentary is about 30 minutes. This is about 3 minutes of footage that we put together to kind of just show, the general topics. The documentary itself goes into much greater detail about integration, inequity, North versus South End inequity, as well as the Seattle Nice, which is a topic that I think we kind of laugh and joke about a little bit, but it's kind of serious. Like people in Seattle saying all the right things, but then when the rubber hits the road, it's like, okay, thanks so much. It was great to meet you. Bye.
Is that the Black Lives Matter sign in the window? But then like,
well, there's a few different signs in people's yards. Absolutely. I think that's a little bit of what we found, is that you put the sign in your yard We believe that, every person is a person, but then when it comes down to it, unwillingness to make a greater sacrifice than a lawn decoration. And we see that through busing a lot, where it's like, if you asked any Seattleite, do you think integration, or do you think segregation is a good thing? People would say, no way. But if you said, okay, are you willing to put your kid on a bus for 20 minutes, 30 minutes? They'd be, well, not my kid. I wouldn't want to put my kid through that. So we have a lot of performance in Seattle. But here's just a quick taste of the full documentary.
We got to fight, although we had to die. We got to hold up the freedom banner.
No justice, no racist, no justice.
There's so many ways that racism and inequity and privilege show up in our system, and we've gotten really good at disguising those ways so that it doesn't sound offensive.
We're basically having a performance, a race dance. And I think Seattle's a place that has a race dance, where they don't actually talk about the issues in the most critical ways that matter.
If we really want our kids successful, they're going to need the skills that we teach them here about race and equity.
What happens when race really comes up in our classrooms? Mostly we have white students getting really uncomfortable.
We have a super segregated city, and it's created a bubble in the north end of whiteness and privilege.
And it's not that the system's broke. It was designed to work that way against you.
When discussing racial equity, the kumbaya days are over.
Put all that politics stuff to the side. Like, this is our life.
Young people are the best way to do anything. Why? Because if you do it right, you're done.
I think it's on our shoulders. It's our responsibility to fight for racial equity.
I think we'll constantly be doing the work of racial equity, and I think we'll constantly be trying to strive for that perfect thing. We may not ever obtain it, but I think it's important to always work towards it.
Your duty is to inspire those coming after you to join in the struggle to define and redefine what is American.
You don't want to be like Tony I, 68 years old, 50 years later, talking about the same things that we talked about 50 years ago.
I have granddaughters, and I tell her every day you walk out this door, go be brilliant and go do something right for somebody else. And it's gonna come back to you. And I believe she's going to do that. I keep telling her, you guys are gonna get it right one day. I probably won't see it, but I know I put this in you now to go get it right.
If we don't really get involved, I think we're right back at the Kerner Commission again. 2 nations, separate and unequal, 1 black, 1 white. Who wants to live there?
All right, Simon. Man, I mean, that's 3 minutes. You said the whole thing's 30 minutes, huh?
30 minutes. We go into a little history, and we dive pretty deep. So I would encourage anybody who's interested, if that spoke to you, in an educational sense, then, January 31st, we'll be doing a screening. I think maybe we have a graphic for it.
Yeah, well, we've got the link in the comments, which is even more active.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
People can click the link right there and they can sign up for it. And yeah, Seattle protests. I remember one thing was my son was out there early on, and I did a lot of interviews at the time, and people were like, "Well, what's to come of this?" And I remember always saying that, like, every generation, every black man in my family is continuous. My grandfather, James Salisbury Sr., fought in World War II, and he came back to North Carolina to the Cotton Curtain, where he was just a nigger. You know what I'm saying? My father, James Salisbury Jr., faced all kinds of racism in his life. You know, here I am right here, in the middle of these Seattle protests. And there's my son. And I'm like, man, hopefully 20 years from now, he's not, it's not the same thing. I only bring that up because, in there somebody mentioned like 50 years later is some of the same issues. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, that's kind of the start of the film is a little bit, the more things change, the more they stay the same in a lot of ways. And the frustrating part about Seattle public schools today is that they've kind of slid backwards into re-segregating based on our neighborhoods, which people say, oh, it's just, it's a coincidence of where I live, where I go to school, but it's not a coincidence. If you look at the old redlining maps of Seattle, you see nothing was coincidental about the way that the city was planned. And so there's a fair amount of that it's kind of it's de facto racism. It's like, you don't have to be the one screaming in somebody's face saying you can't go to school, in Little Rock, Arkansas. You can be the person that says, well, that's just, that's what the North End looks like. It looks like that. And so that's what the schools look like. But none of it is coincidental. And that's really what the documentary dives into.
All right, good stuff. You say you're not on this side of the camera often, but you are here. So any questions for me?
I do have a question for you. So as a fellow Bulldog, when I went to Garfield, I was bused from West Seattle. And I thought it was very, I feel like I was kind of proud. I was like, oh, I'm going to Garfield, and on paper and kind of in the lunchroom, things looked pretty diverse. And there was a certain pride to that. Like, hey, we're at this school in the middle of the city that's kind of integrated. But I looked at a lot of my classes, and they were pretty white. Like, a lot of the classes that I was in. So I was going to ask about your experience, because you went to Garfield maybe 10 years before I did. And I was going to ask you if that's what the lunchroom looked like, if that's what your classrooms looked like.
Is that what your question was? Come out here and call me old man.
Hey, the question wasn't what year did you graduate? It was, what did Garfield look like?
All right. So when I was at Garfield, it's really interesting because that was there, but it wasn't. I don't think 10 years later it was more defined. So it was there in just a few classes, like, marine biology. Marine biology, there was a great class. These guys used to take a field trip to Hawaii and all kinds of stuff. And it was Mr. McGowan, and that class was very white, but most of our classes then, and you got to think Garfield had a much bigger black population overall. And then you got these subsections that started to grow in kind of Garfield, and these exclusionary areas that were there. That wasn't necessarily my experience when I was there, and it was crazy too, because you're right. You go to the lunchroom, you go this and that. I mean, one, it was always a sense of belonging, no matter what people's race or ethnic background, because most white kids that went to Garfield wanted to be at Garfield. So it wasn't one of those things. It wasn't one of these situations where, it's hostile kind of environment or whatever. But it was, we had way more black people in advanced classes and everything else than when you went to school there. I took 2 foreign language classes. There was, it was thick. I'm saying? I took French, I took Spanish, I took a bunch of science classes. I went that route. It was a lot of black people I was in class with.
Yeah, and it's interesting now today. I wonder if you've spoken to people that talk about like the kind of the tale of two Garfields, that there's segregation within an integrated school. But maybe that's a whole nother documentary.
It's like I tell people all the time, we just get it coming and going here, man. You know what I'm saying? The tale of two Gar. I mean, yeah, and it's true. That's unfortunately is very much true. I really like how, you're using your camera and your know-how and your street smarts and everything else in creating something here that is thought-provoking, asking a lot of hard questions. Maybe some answers are found. Lots of times answers will still remain. Man, I appreciate your work.
Thanks, and right back at you.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, man, and yeah, you're right. You hooked up with, take this, I got to figure it out because you hooked up with the Roosevelt alumni, and we got to hook up with the Garfield alumni. Let's see what we can put together. You know what I'm saying? Interesting story that might be there to be told.
Absolutely. And if I have time just to leave people with, one thought and maybe one shout out, it would be
right there.
That throughout this documentary process, you're hoping to find that magic bullet, that answer. Oh, is it busing? Is it magnet programs? Is it all this stuff? And there's complications and messiness with all of it. And I just don't want people to get depressed, because there are people out there doing really kind of frontline work on these issues of educational equity. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the NAACP Youth Council that we got to interview and speak with, because in this world of yard signs and kind of like big picture ideas about what equity means, they have 9 very, very concrete demands that they are saying this is what will help achieve equity in Seattle public schools. And I thought that was incredibly refreshing.
Yeah, man, no, good stuff. People need to keep in mind too, Seattle Public Schools is $1 billion school district. You know what I'm saying? They got $1 billion in that school district over there. So they'll figure it out. Simon, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time. Salman, do we have that link in the comments for everybody? We put the link in the comments. We want to encourage everybody to go and sign up January 31st, right? And that's what day is premiering. And man, these are important conversations to have. Simon, thank you.
Appreciate you all.
All right. We're going to take a quick break right now. We come back. Bayana Holiday returns to the set. You're watching the Morning Update Show.